Okay, well, Barry, I think you want me to get started, so I will welcome everyone. Thank you all for coming. All the faces that I've seen before, faces that I have not seen. I'm so wonderful to see you all. Thank you, and welcome to this evening of what are we calling it? Twas the night before Solstice, but it's stories fitting for the entire season. I am Eva Abram. I'm a member of the Seattle Storytellers Guild, and I am your MC for this evening. I'd like to start by acknowledging that we live, work, play, and benefit from the bounties provided by this land of the indigenous people. The tribes include here in the Northwest the Chinook, Colville, Hoh, Snoqualmie, Yakima, Spokane, Puyallup, Snohomish, Steilacoom, and the Duwamish, and many others. So we acknowledge them all and we thank them for taking care of the land and the animals who share this planet with us. And before I go on to introduce the tellers, I'd like to ask all of you to stick around after the storytelling is over because we have some announcements of upcoming programs that I really do not want you to miss. Okay, and our two tellers this evening, we have Anne Brendler and Ellen Wanless. There they are. Anne will start off the storytelling, and then Ellen will take a turn, so they'll go back and forth. I'm not going to butt in while they're switching over. I'll just let them continue the evening for us. Now, Anne has loved telling stories for years. Now, she prefers informal, cozy settings. So wherever you are, get your cat, get cozy, and just settle in. And frequently tells to audiences of young children and also to the young at heart. And looking at this audience, I think we fill that bill quite nicely. The boy in Anne's first story pursues the truth of one of his grandpa's stories. Imagine the delight in that adventure. Anne hopes you'll find equal delight in her telling of this adventure. And thank you to Natalie Kenzie Warnock. She wrote the story and generously gave Anne permission to tell it to us. Natalie, if she isn't here yet, she will be one of our Zoom guests this evening. We thank you for giving Anne permission so that we could hear this story. And Anne's second story, well, let's just say it's a bit of a surprise. And Ellen Wanless grew up in a family of storytellers, the kind that would sit around the campfire spinning tales, tall and small. And this past summer, enchanted by the storytelling at the National Storytelling Conference, which was held right here in our Federal Way area, she's returned to this art of storytelling. She was inspired. Thank you. To learn to spin tales, and she hopes stories that will delight and inspire all who listen. Ellen's first story will be The Christmas Cuckoo, and she'll surprise you with her second story. Right now, let's welcome Anne Brendler.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for coming. And I really do wish that Natalie Kinsey Warnock could have been here. This is her story that she wrote. The title of the story is The Fiddler of the Northern Lights, and it is available in the Seattle Public Libraries, and you owe it to yourself to check it out just to see the beautiful illustrations. But as I tell all the children to whom I tell stories, we're going to work this story together, and you're going to make the illustrations. You're going to make the drawings that come with the story. You're going to do that in your own head. I'm just going to help a little bit. The Fiddler of the Northern Lights. Way far up north, where it gets bitterly, bitterly cold in the winter, cold enough to freeze the lakes and freeze the rivers quite solid, there lived a family. This was a place where the white owls would fly at night. It's a place where the wolves would howl at night. And it's a place where the stars hung so brightly in the sky. It was as if you could hop from star to star like stones in a river. Now, this family that I'm talking of had their cabin in the woods very close to the St. Maurice River. Think very northern Vermont, southern Canada. Very, very cold up there. The family was Mama and Papa and Armand and Alice and Henry. Henry was only 8. Henry had been told that while strange and wondrous things do happen up there in the north, nothing strange and wondrous had ever happened to him. And yet, Grandpa had told him that strange and wondrous things would happen to him. He just needed to be patient. Oh, Grandpa, he was quite the character. He lived in a cabin nearby. Grandpa told stories. Grandpa would come over to the family's cabin. He would walk through the snow and get to the family's cabin, and he and Henry would sit down, and Grandpa would tell these wonderful tales. Tell the tales of Libou Blanc, the white owl, or of the loup-garou, the fierce wolf. Grandpa's stories made it so that the long, long nights of winter always seemed to go by so quickly because he told stories. One afternoon, Henry's older brother, Armand, and Henry were out on the frozen river fishing through holes that they had chopped in the ice. And Henry turned to Armand and he said, "Did you know that when the moon is full, rabbits come out and dance in the moonlight? Did you know that, Armand?" "Who told you that?" said Armand. "Well, Grandpa did. It's in one of his stories," said Henry. "Oh, you can't believe everything that Grandpa says. You just can't believe it. He just makes that stuff up." Well, when Henry, came back in later and was helping Mama and Alice bring in logs for the fireplace, Henry said to his Mama, "I know what makes the Northern Lights dance. Do you know what makes the Northern Lights dance?" Well, Alice chipped in. "No, what makes the Northern Lights dance?" "Okay," said Henry. "Grandpa says it's magic. Magic and the fiddler." "The fiddler?" said Mama. "What do you mean by the fiddler?" "Well, Grandpa told me," said Henry. "The fiddler is the one that makes the Northern Lights dance. And he said that in his village, when he was a boy, the old folks, they used to say that the Northern Light, well, the fiddler, I know it's the fiddler, and he plays his fiddle, and the northern lights wake up, and they start to dance when they hear the music played by the fiddler. Oh, Henry, said Mama, that's not true. That's just something that Grandpa makes up. No, it isn't. He doesn't just make it up. It's true. And the next day, Henry ran over to Grandpa's cabin and he said, Grandpa, it's true, isn't it? It's the fiddler that makes the northern lights dance. I know it's the fiddler. Have you ever seen the fiddler, Grandpa? Well, Grandpa had to admit, no, I've never seen the fiddler, but lots of people have. Well, can we go see the fiddler? Grandpa, please, can we go see the northern lights and find the fiddler? Well, that doesn't sound like a bad idea. And later that night, Grandpa came over to the family's house with skates that he had made from some wood and some barrel hoops. Here, Henry, put these on. What are we going to do, Grandpa? Oh, we're going on an adventure. At night? Said Henry. Yep, we're going at night. What are we going to do? We're gonna find the fiddler. Oh, said Henry. And he put his skates on right away, and Grandpa put his own skates on right away, and off they went. They skated up the river, the St. Maurice River, and it was so dark, except for the stars overhead, that you could see the reflection of the stars in the river. And Henry skated from one to the other. At one point, though, it was so dark, Henry was a little afraid. And he skated kind of close to Grandpa, because it seemed like Grandpa knew what he was doing. But Henry felt like sometimes it was as dark as the mouth of a wolf. They skated and skated and skated for a long while, and then all of a sudden they saw the northern lights. They were swaying and dancing and swaying, and there were the purple lights and the green lights and the rose lights and the blue. Oh, they were beautiful, swaying. And Henry kept listening. He couldn't hear any fiddler. Do you hear the fiddler, Grandpa? I don't hear any music, said Grandpa. He must be out there. And they kept skating and skating, and the lights kept flashing and dancing and swaying way up there in the sky. It was beautiful. But after a while, the lights faded. And Henry said to his father, I guess the fiddler stopped playing, and I never heard him. And Grandpa said he didn't hear him either. And so Grandpa said, I guess I need to sit down and rest. And he sat down on some rocks by the side of the river, and Henry felt a little disappointed. He had really hoped to hear the fiddler, and Grandpa said, well, I guess we could try again another time. It's gotten kind of dark, though, and so I guess we better skate on back home. And so they did, skating side to side, almost holding hands. Henry was a little afraid still because it was now so dark. And they got back to the cabin. And Mama was frantic. She was beside herself. Where have you two been? Don't you know that it's dark outside and there are wolves out there, and you could have fallen into something? And where have you? Oh, said Grandpa, don't worry so much, Angeline. We were just skating to find the Fiddler of the Northern Lights. Well, you sit right down here, she said. And she sat them both next to the fire and brought them blankets to wrap in because they'd gotten so cold. And she brought them cups of tea. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door. I'll get it, said Papa. No, I will, said Mama. And she went over, opened the door, and there stood a man they had never seen before. He was tall and slender. He had a long white beard and a black hat pulled down tight. You could see the wisps of his hair sticking out at the side, and a long black coat. And under one arm, he had a black box. I'm sorry to bother you, said the man, but I was out playing and I got so cold. I wonder if I could come in and get warm by your fire. Oh, certainly, said the father. I will certainly let you in. Mama, please, could you get some more tea? And so they sat there by the fire, and the man put his case down on a chair and said to the tall man, what were you playing? Oh, said the man, I was playing my fiddle. Would you like to see it? And he opened his case and picked out a shiny black fiddle. Would you like to hear me play? Oh, would I? Said Henry. Yes, we would, said Grandpa. And so the stranger started to play his fiddle. It was the most beautiful, clear music they had ever heard, and the music floated right out of the cabin, and the northern lights began to dance again. And there they were as the family looked out the front door. They could see the northern lights dancing all over again in their beautiful gowns of rose and green and blue and purple. And families up and down the river came out and looked as well because they could hear the music. The stranger said, wouldn't you like to come in and dance a little to the music? And the people said, oh, yes, we would. And all the people from the river tromped through the snow into the cabin. They pushed aside the chairs, the stools, the tables, and the dancing began. And they danced and they danced, and the fiddler played, and there was more fun that evening with the dancing. They danced all night. Everybody had a wonderful time. As daylight began to break, the fiddler said, I'm glad you've had a wonderful time, but I've got to be on my way. The northern lights have stopped for now, and I must stop my playing. And they all the families went home, and the fiddler put his fiddle in the case, closed it up, put it under his arm, and went off through the woods. Mama turned to Henry and she said, Henry, it's bedtime. You've been up all night. Yes, I have, but I got to see the fiddler. And Mama said to Grandpa, I didn't believe your stories before now, but I think now I'll have to stop doubting you. Well, said Grandpa, scratching his head, I didn't believe my stories either, but I guess I believe my own stories. And everybody laughed. Henry never did meet up with the fiddler ever again. But the old folks say that when the lights, the northern lights, are out there dancing, they can hear, if the wind is right, they can hear the strains of some wonderful music, fiddle music. And as for Grandpa's other stories, well, Henry makes sure that if he goes out for a walk on a moonlit night, he stuffs his pockets with carrots just in case he comes across any of those dancing rabbits. That's the end of The Fiddler of the Northern Lights.
Thank you, Anne.
Thank you, Ellen.
Well done, Anne.
Thank you, Letitia.
You're welcome.
You certainly did paint pictures in my head with your stories, with your words.
As you will also with your story.
Before I tell the Christmas cuckoo, I will tell, I think I'll end with the Christmas cuckoo after Anne again. I will tell the story of the White Cat in the Dovre Mountains, which is an old Norwegian folk tale. First translated into English in 1859. And I found this tale in a book called The Troll with No Heart in His Body, as retold by Lisa Lung Larsen. The White Cat in the Dovre Mountains. Long ago and far away in a forest in Norway, there was a woodsman walking through a forest, and he came across a great white bear. Oh, a magnificent white bear. But it was trapped in a cage. Looking around, he opened the cage and freed the bear, who thanked him and asked, "What may I do?" In return, well, the woodsman was going off to the king to settle a dispute with a neighbor. The journey could be a little treacherous through the forest, so he asked the bear to be his bodyguard. And the bear, knowing he could stop at the edge of the forest and not go into the city, he agreed. So the two of them set off. Well, Solstice found them entering the Dovre Mountains, and that is no place anyone wants to be on the darkest night of the year. For hundreds of trolls live in the Dovre Mountains, and on Solstice Eve, they love to gather in packs and scare humans into giving them all their food. So the woodsman knew he had to find a safe place for the two of them to sleep that night, and up ahead he did see a small farmhouse, its windows cheerily lit from candles inside, smoke curling up the chimney. So he knocked on the door, and Farmer Halver answered. "Good evening, sir. Might we have a safe place to sleep tonight?" Oh, Farmer Halver was astonished. "No, not tonight. It is not safe at all. For tonight the trolls come and descend into our farmhouse, and they eat everything in sight. If we don't have a feast prepared for them, they will destroy the house. And matter of fact, we are leaving." "Ah, trolls schmolls," said the woodsman, for he had outsmarted a number of trolls in his day. "Well, as you wish," said the farmer, and he and his family left. Well, the bear and the woodsman, they go into the kitchen, this long table covered with platters of steaming food, meatballs and gravy, sauerkraut with sausages, mashed potatoes, meat pies, fish cakes, chicken pies, porridges, puddings. And they start tasting a little bit of each. And when they're done tasting everything, they are quite full. and they look around for a place to spend the night. The woodsman chooses the broom closet and goes in there, and the bear goes underneath the warm kitchen stove, curls up, and falls asleep. Well, round about midnight, there's a huge roaring and pounding, so loud and stomping it shakes the very foundation of the farmhouse as a pack of trolls roar down the mountain, slam open the door, go into the kitchen, and tuck into the food. Now, you might know, or you might not know, that trolls have very bad table manners. They don't use knives, forks, spoons. They don't use their fingers properly. They grab great gobs of food and shove it into their mouth. Food flies everywhere. Why, a troll feast looks more like a troll food fight. And that's exactly what was going on. And off in the corner, two little brothers were fighting over a sausage. It's mine, it's mine, it's mine. And the one whaps his brother with his tail. No, it's mine, it's mine. And he kicks his brother in the shins. Ooh, that got him so mad he snapped off a branch from the tree growing on his brother's head and whaps him across the shoulder with it. And as they're fighting, the sausage flies out of their hands, hits the floor, and rolls to the stove. The boys, on hands and knees, they see a great white cat under the stove, and boy, are they going to have fun. And one skewers that sausage with a fork, holds it under the bear's nose. Here, kitty, 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 you want a treat? Well, that bear opens one eye, and then he opens the other eye. And then he opens both eyes, and he does not like the mayhem he sees. Bears don't really care for trolls anyways, and he crawled out from under that stove and drew himself up into his great bear height, and with a growl and a snapping and a whacking and a clawing, he kicks every single troll out of that house, and they go running up the mountain. Then he crawls back under the stove and goes to sleep. And the woodsman, who'd been watching everything through a crack in the door, he sat down in the broom closet, leaned against the wall, and went to sleep. Well, the next morning, bright and early, those two are both up and they're ready to head out when Farmer Halver and his family come back in, and he is astonished. What happened? Obviously, the trolls were here, but you are unscathed. Troll schmolls, said the woodsman. They didn't bother us, and the next year, if they try to bother you, just remind them of that great white cat. Thanking the farmer for his hospitality, the two leave. Great white cat. No idea what they were talking about, and soon forgot all about it. Until the next solstice. Farmer Halver's puttering in his barn, and down from the mountain comes a roar. Farmer Halver, do you still have that great white cat? Farmer Halver thinks and shouts back, yes, I do. As a matter of fact, that cat just gave birth this summer to 7 white kittens who are bigger and angrier than that cat. Oh, the roar of disappointment that flowed down that mountain as the troll shouted, well, now, won't you be sorry? We will never visit you again. And to this day, the trolls have never bothered Farmer Halver or his family. And snip, snap, snout, my tale's told out.
Well, hello again, everybody. It is me again, and it is my turn to tell you a story that's true. It's a story called Mama's Surprise. In 1959, when I was verging on 13, my father, who had been a widower for 6 years, married the woman who became my stepmother. Now, when you hear the word stepmother, don't be thinking the stepmother of all the stories. Don't be thinking of the wicked stepmother who takes everything away from the children and treats them so meanly and yada, yada. No, 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 not that kind of stepmother. My stepmother is an amazing person, and she is still alive in her 90s, and I think she is the greatest. I called her Mama. When she came into our lives, my two brothers and I were adolescents, and all of a sudden, Mama had to deal with teenagers. Can you imagine that? Teenagers. Oh, she did wonderfully well. She loved to play games with us, and oh, well, it was the time of the Kennedys in the White House, and so we played touch football at Thanksgiving time, even though that very first Thanksgiving, she was quite pregnant. I was really glad to have a mama because I was a girl and I needed a mama, and I was not wanting to have to go shopping all the time with the neighborhood mamas. I wanted my own mama. And here I had one. And exactly a year later, after my father had married Mama, they had a baby girl, which meant I had a sister. And now things were just a little bit more even in the household. Now it was 3 guys against 2 girls. And my mama did all kinds of things for me. She even let me paint my room pink. Can you imagine? Pink. I finally got a pink room with frilly curtains. I loved it. But Mama had that Christmas right before my little sister was born, she had knitted my father a sweater. It was a beautiful fisherman's knit sweater with all those cable stitches in it. It was gorgeous. I wished I had such a sweater. And the following autumn, when my little sister was not even a year old, my mama got to knitting. And she was knitting like crazy. Every time I came home from school, she was sitting down knitting. What it turned out to be, I discovered later on, was a beautiful set of a hat with a white edge to it that went round the forehead and over one's ears. And atop the white was a black stripe. And then the crown of the hat was red. And the sweater that matched it had a white turtleneck collar, so soft, and a black stripe across the shoulders. And then the body of the sweater was red. The mittens. Oh, the mittens. The mittens were red with a black stripe here, and then a long white part that went up to one's elbow, and you could fold that down for a wonderful warm cuff. Oh, when the items were finished, I did love them. But let me get back to what was happening while she was knitting. Like I say, she was knitting every day when I came home from school. And before I knew what they were going to be, I said, "What are you knitting?" "Oh," she said, "I'm just knitting a sweater." And I said, "Well, I really like those colors." And, "Oh, well, thank you," she said. And who are you knitting it for?" I was thinking of the sweater she had knitted for my dad. "Oh," she said, I'm knitting it for a friend of mine. I've been a friend of hers for some time, and I just feel like keeping myself busy knitting her a present." "Oh," I said, a bit crestfallen. The next day, when I came home from school, "What are you knitting?" "Oh, I already told you I'm knitting this sweater. And and I'm going to start on the hat pretty soon and the mittens." "Oh," I said. "And who are they for again?" Hoping she'd say something different. "Oh," she said, "I told you. They're for this friend of mine. I've known her for some time." A few days later, I came home and said, "What are you knitting?" "Well," she said, I've kind of finished with it, but before I put the final stitches in, I want to make sure that it's going to fit my friend, and you're kind of the same size that she is, and so I wonder if I could hold it up to you and see if the sleeves are long enough and if the shoulders are broad enough, and oh, I'd like to help with fitting it." And so she kind of held it up to me, and we put the hat on my head, and oh, the hat fit pretty good, and the mittens were the right size, and oh, well, "This is good," she said. "This'll do just fine." A few days later, I came home, and she had completely finished knitting. In fact, there was no knitting to be found anywhere in the house. I said, "Oh, why aren't you knitting? And where's the stuff you were making?" And she said, "Oh, I had to send it off." "Send it off? What do you mean, send it off?" I said. The tears were starting to fall from my eyes. I said, You can't send it off. I didn't get to see it at the end. And besides, it was my size, and you fitted it to me. And oh, she gathered what I was saying. Yeah, I know. You thought it was for you, didn't you?" "Yes, I did. But I had to send it off to her because, well, I had to send it early, you see, because she celebrates Solstice, not Christmas." What solstice?" I stammered through my tears, and she explained that Solstice was kind of like Christmas, and people light a lot of lights, and it celebrates the darkest evening of the year, yes, but it also celebrates the return of light. The days will start getting longer, and that's what people celebrate. "Oh, well, that's great, but I thought it was gonna be mine," I finally confessed. And she said, "Yes, I know you did. But I will make you the next sweater. The next sweater I make will be yours. Is that all right?" "Promise?" I sniveled. "Yes, I promise," said Mama. Well, on Christmas morning, we all ran downstairs, and Santa had been there, and there were lots of presents under the tree, and the stockings by the fireplace were full, and my little sister, who was almost one at that point, was just thrilled and excited and happy, and she just couldn't wait to tear things open. And there was a lot of tearing going on in that living room. And finally, everything had been opened. There was paper everywhere. There was ribbon everywhere. And yet there was one package left under the tree. I pointed that out to my mama and to my dad. "There's one package left. Who's that for?" And my mama said, "Oh, I don't know, but I think it has your name on it," she said, as if she were puzzled. "Why don't you go see? I'm not sure it's for." Well, I was never one to stop in the face of a mystery, and I went over and I yanked the box out from under the tree, ripped off the wrapping paper, lifted the lid of the box, and, well, if you've guessed it, Good for you. You have an imagination. There it was, the whole ensemble, the sweater, the hat, the mittens, which went right away on me. Over my pajamas, I put that sweater, and on my messed up hair, I put that hat, and on my nice warm hands, I put nice warm mittens. And I was the belle of the ball with my little bedroom slippers sticking out underneath my nightgown. That was the story of how my mama made me a sweater that I loved from the day I got it. And the only time I parted with it was when my little sister grew up big enough to wear it. Thank you. That's Mama's surprise. And now we're back to Ellen.
I'm going to try. Oh, can't do it. Hello, everyone, again. Thank you, Anne. I'll close with the story of the Christmas cuckoo, written in the mid-1800s by an Irish poet, Frances Brown. She has a collection of stories called Granny's Wonderful Chair, and that was reprinted in 1916, and it's in our King County Library system. I found this tale in a collection called Christmas Fairy Tales, selected by Neil Phillip. Once upon a time, on a bleak moor in the north country of Ireland, there stood a small village. And on the edge of that small village was a small hut. And inside that hut lived the brothers Spare and Scrub. And there they worked as cobblers. Now, most of the villagers would bring their shoes and boots for repair, but there was the occasional snide remark heard, you bring your boots to them for the mending and they're the worse for the wear. But nonetheless, between their cobbling, their barley field, and a small cottage garden, the brothers earned a meager living. Until one unfortunate day when an experienced cobbler moved to town. Why, he had worked in the city, in the capital city, where he cobbled for the queen and the princesses. And pretty soon the villagers found out that one patch from that cobbler outlasted two of Spare and Scrub's. Well, you can imagine, Spare and Scrub's cobbling dwindled down to naught. So, to make ends meet, they hired out in some of the wealthier villages' fields. And in this way, they eked out a living. Until we come to Christmas Eve. Now, that summer had been cold and rainy. The barley harvest was minimal. All they had for their Christmas feast was a loaf of barley bread, some dried up pieces of bacon, and weak beer of their own brewing. To make matters worse, there was but a scanty fire on the fireplace, for a new fallen snow had hidden all the kindling that they had been planning to gather. Now, as Spare surveyed this scene, he thought of that great root right outside their door, huge, gnarly old thing. Once a grand tree had grown from it, but had long since fallen. "Scrub," said Spare, "shall we sit here cold when that root lies yonder? Grab your hatchet and let's go get it and bring it indoors." "Oh," said Scrub, "nay, one ought not to work on Christmas Eve." "Oh, Scrub, just think of it. If we were to get that huge old root on our hearth, why, poor as we are, we'd have the grandest Yule log in all the village." "Well, Scrub," who liked a little grandeur. He put down his scruples and picked up his axe, and the two of them dashed out and began chopping and chipping and whacking and shoving and pulling, and they got that great old root through their door and onto the hearth, where it started to burn. And then, as it began to crackle and blaze, my, how that little hut looked much more cheerful. Scrub picked up his wooden glass of beer. Long life and good fortune to us, brother. And as he took a sip, cuckoo, cuckoo, came from the log. Scrub was mighty scared, but Spare was mighty curious. What is that? Cuckoo, cuckoo. When out of a hollow of the log that had not yet started to burn, flew the gray cuckoo, landing on their table. Good evening, gentlemen. What season is this? Why, it's Christmas Eve. Oh, and here I was, thinking with the warmth of your fire was a warm spring day waking me up. Now that you've burned my lodgings, might you provide me another safe place to finish my hibernation? Oh, surely, welcome and stay. I'll scoop out a nest in the thatch for you. But first you must be hungry. Please celebrate our Christmas meal with us. And he cut what looked like a pretty big slice of that barley bread to Scrub and gave it to the cuckoo. Well, the three of them did indeed have a very Merry Christmas dinner, after which the cuckoo flew into the nest and went to sleep. Well, the snow stopped, the rains came, the days grew longer, the cold grew shorter. And then one fine spring morning, that cuckoo flies down to the table. Good morning, gentlemen. I'm about to fly around the world to tell everyone spring has sprung. And what may I bring in return for your hospitality? Oh, Scrub wasn't so scared anymore when he was trying to think. What could he bring? A diamond and a pearl would fit in that beak of yours. Oh, nay. I know naught of them, only of that which grows upon the ground. Now hard by the well at the edge of the world grow two trees. One they call the golden tree, for it has leaves of finely hammered gold, and when they fall off in the fall and hit the ground, it sounds like coins hitting the bottom of a change purse. The other has luminous green leaves that never fall off, and some call it the merry tree, for they who hold one of those leaves is blithe of heart, and can live as happy in a hut as in a palace. Oh, said Spare, I'll take one of those. Spare! We have no money. I'll take a golden leaf. And the cuckoo nodded, sang out, I'll be back in the fall, and flew away. Well, spring rolled into summer, rolled into the harvest season, and one fine crisp morning, in through the door and on to the table flies the cuckoo, and he hands Scrub a gold leaf and Spare a green leaf. Stay and welcome, said Spare, and help us eat our breakfast. The cuckoo does, then flies into his nest and goes to sleep. Well, Scrub spent no time spending that gold leaf. He cut off a bit here, cut off a bit there, moved into the village, bought a sweet little cottage that had windows and curtains at the windows. Oh, he got rid of his scrappy old clothes and had finely tailored clothes and well-heeled boots, and that experienced cobbler was so impressed he hired him on as a partner and taught him the finer techniques of the trade. And pretty soon, Fairfeather, who once thought she didn't think much of Scrub, well, now she started to smile so generously at this fine young man. And soon indeed they got married and held a huge wedding, to which all the village was invited except for Spare. Fairfeather thought he was beneath her. Scrub thought he was a disgrace to the family. Now, back at the hut, Spare didn't mind. He was happy, though all the villagers thought he was crazy. But they did notice he never seemed sour nor sad. At first he had kind of a raggedy group of visitors, a grumpy old tinker, a mischievous beggar boy, and a crotchety old woman, who everyone thought was a witch, she was so mean. And the wonder was, no one knew how. As they hung out with Spare, why that tinker started to be nice to his donkey. That beggar boy stayed out of mischief and stayed in school. And why that old lady, she started smiling at all the village children and handing them candies from her pockets. Well, word started to spread about visiting with Spare, and the lord of the village went to look for him. Now that lord was so disgruntled. He had lived at the capital court. He had recently been banished, for he'd been heard muttering about the crown princess's turned out toes. Well, out he went, back to his little castle on that barren moor. Well, he came across Scrub in a meadow, gathering watercress by a meadow stream, and no one knows how. And the wonder was, after conversing with Spare, why he threw off his melancholy and went back to his small castle and started holding large feasts for all the villagers to come. Well, word spread through all the North Country, and eventually to the castle in the capital city, which was a mighty grumpy place. Why, the king himself was quite upset with a neighboring princess. With her dowry of 7 islands, she refused to marry one of his sons, the crown prince. The lords and ladies held spites and envies, the magistrates and princes argued. So that king thought, maybe this man can help us out, and he sent a royal messenger with a royal velvet cloak, a diamond ring, and a summons to appear before the court immediately. Spare heard the summons and said, I will leave the next morning, for he was expecting the cuckoo, who did indeed arrive the next morning. And when he found out where Spare was going, I won't be visiting you there, for surely they'll lay a trap and put me in a cage. So take good care of all those leaves I've already given you. And the cuckoo flew off to Scrub. Well, Spare sewed up those leaves in the lining of his old leather jacket, picked up a few belongings, and headed off. And when he arrived at that palace in the capital city, all those fine people could not understand why the king had summoned such a raggedy cobbler. But the wonder was, and no one knew how, but after talking with Spare, that king, why, he forgot all about that snooty princess. And as the day wore on and the weeks were on, as everyone talked with Spare, my, those lords and ladies, they dropped their spites and envies. The princes and magistrates actually compromised. The judges stopped showing favor. It became a happier palace was not heard of in all of the North Country. Now the king put Spare up in some luxurious lodgings and appointed his wonderful page Tinseltoes to take care of Spare and teach him the ways of the court. And they had a grand time walking and talking. But the one thing Tinseltoes did not like was that raggedy old leather jacket that Spare wore, with all the velvet cloaks for the asking. And each time he was asked, Spare would always reply, why, this jacket I wore when I was but a cobbler in a hut. It keeps me humble. Humble schmumble, thought Tinseltoes, and he took matters into his own hands. And one morning he snuck in early before Spare was awake and grabbed that jacket and flung it out the window. You can imagine Spare's distress when he woke up. No leather jacket to be found. He searched high and low and all around, and Tinseltoes didn't know where it was. That morning at breakfast, indeed, some frowns were at the table. Some arguments were heard in the halls, whisperings that got louder and louder, and by dinner there was an all-out food fight. Spare knew he had to find that leather coat. So early the next morning, so as not to alarm anyone, he lowered a rope out that window and climbed down and landed, and whoop! Startle a woodsman! Dear sir, yesterday morning I was nearly clobbered by a leather coat, and today I'm nearly clobbered by you. I don't suppose the two of you belong to each other. Why, yes, we do. Might you know where my leather coat is? Ah, just as I was about to grab it, these two urchins run around, snatch it from my hands, and head off into the woods. It'll be in that forest if it's anywhere. Why, thank you, my good man, and handing him a coin, Spare hurries off into the forest. Meanwhile, back in the village, Scrub and Fairfeather, having heard of Spare's great good fortune, with just a few paltry leaves. Oh, what will the king think of us with our golden leaves, thought Fairfeather. Oh, wife, let us head there, surely. The king will make us lord and lady, and we, too, will live lives of luxury. So they put on their finest coats, grabbed some of their finest possessions, and 2 gold leaves, and headed out. And long about midday, Scrub realized he'd forgotten to pack anything to eat. Oh, we should have had that loaf of barley bread, wife. Oh, how can you think of barley bread? That's beneath us. Surely we will be eating wheaten bread and only the finest cheeses. But I am sore hungry. Well, let's look at our gold leaves then. That'll cheer you up and take your mind off things. And as they were sitting looking at their leaves, out from behind a tree at the mouth of the forest was an old woman, and she had heard everything. Now she approached Scrub and Fairfeather, leaning on her tall staff, a heavy satchel across her body. And as she approached, "Noble lord and lady, for I can tell you are such by your speech," her name was Buttertongue, "would you condescend to lighten my load so that I may get home?" Oh, obviously their nobility was apparent. And surely they would condescend. What may we do? Oh, and she pulls out an old wooden jug stoppered with a roll of leaves. In here is only the mead made from the finest honey, and I have some wheaten bread and some rolls of cheese. Would you condescend to eat them with the likes of me? Oh, surely they would help her eat. Now, and the 3 of them sat down. Now, as you might have guessed, Buttertongue was a witch, a wood witch to be exact. And that morning, as she brewed that mead, she mixed in curious spells and unusual herbs, and this potion caused all who drank it to fall asleep with their eyes wide open. And sure enough, there sat Scrub, a wedge of cheese in his hand, sound asleep, and Fairfeather with some wheaten bread in her hand, sound asleep. And Buttertongue shouts to the forest, "What ho, sons! Come, gather this harvest!" And out from the woods dash these 2 little imps, Spy and Pounce is carrying a leather jacket. "Oh, we don't need that raggedy old thing. Lighten these 2 people of their burdens." And Spy and Pounce take the fine clothes and the looking glass and the drinking horn rimmed with gold and the 2 gold leaves. But just before they leave, Pounce picks up the ragged leather coat and places it oh so gently around Scrub's shoulders. And then they grab their loot and head off. Well, the next morning as the sun's rising, Scrub and Fairfeather come too, and you would imagine they'd be mighty mad at having been robbed. But that was Spare's leather coat, with the merry leaves still inside. "Wife," said Scrub, "why were we thinking of going to the capital city? Life was good in the village. Let's return." "Oh," said Fairfeather, "I can't for the life of me think why we would do such a thing. Yes, let's return." And so, as they're heading back to the village, Scrub sees the old hut, a little more forlorn, a little more weather-beaten. But he says, "Fairfeather, Spare and I were happy here. Let's go live in the hut. Oh, what a charming idea, she thought. And as they approached and creaked open the door, she saw she could make it cozy and inviting in no time. Scrub grabbed some garden tools and headed off to the field. Well, later that afternoon, who comes out from the forest but Spare? He had searched by moonlight and sunlight, high and low and all around, and not a leather coat to be found. So he was heading home too. And as he got close, he saw the door was open and someone was in the field. And that looked like Fairfeather, and that looked like his brother. So he walked up to the door and knocked. "Good afternoon, mistress." "Oh, good afternoon, master." She didn't recognize him. He was so changed in his royal clothes. His beard was trimmed. So she said, "What brings you here?" And he thought, "I lost my way hunting in the woods. Might you have some water for me to drink?" "Oh, please, do come in." And as she handed him a cup of water, he saw a leather coat on a hook on the wall. "I lost my leather coat hunting. That one would make a fine hunting coat. Might your husband mind trading my velvet cloak for this coat?" "Oh, we certainly have the better end of that bargain." And she takes the leather cloak and puts it on the hook, and Spare puts on his coat, and yes, indeed, those leaves are still in the lining. And as he's finishing his water, who comes inside but Scrub? Recognizes his brother. "Spare, Scrub!" Oh, they embrace. They haven't seen each other in a few years. They're so happy. "Stay and welcome," says Scrub, and they sit down to supper. And as they're eating, Scrub looks around. "Spare," he says, "we were happy here. Let's the three of us live here." Oh, they all love that idea. The next day, Spare pulls out from the corner his old cobbler's awls and his laths. Scrub teaches him the finer techniques of the trade, and soon word went out among all the North Country there never were such cobblers as these two boys. People began bringing them their shoes and their boots, and the wonder was, and no one knew how, but all who came with discontent and heavy hearts and misfortune left lighter in spirit. Even that old hut began to change. Why, windows were added with curtains. Rooms were attached to the back. A flowering honeysuckle grew over the roof. Fragrant roses grew rich by the front door. And every fall, the cuckoo returns with 3 merry leaves. And that's what I know when I last heard news from the North Country.
Wonderful. Thank you all. Well, that was fantastic. I'll ask if everybody wants to go to gallery view, and you can turn your mics on and share your comments with the storytellers.
Ellen, I thought that was splendid.
Those were great, y'all. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
And yours too, Anne.
I jotted down a line. Oh, in Ellen's story, he put down his scruples
I
and picked
love
up his
that.
axe.
Yes, I love that.
And in one of your stories, Anne, you said, "Oh, his as dark as the mouth of a wolf."
Yes.
Wow, that's beautiful.
Well, that's the original author's wording.
Yes, I know, but it's beautiful.
Oh,
I'm glad you kept it.
Something, yes.
Yeah.
Glad you liked it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Thank you so much for bringing light and laughter and beautiful imagery to this dark night. It was just stunning. Both of you.
Oh, thank you, Pat. Thank you so much.
Yes.
I was so lucky to be here. Thank you, Anne, and thank
Oh,
you, Ellen. I felt like a little kid, and I
oh,
was all wrapped up. And I don't remember the last time someone read a story like this to me.
oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Isn't it
so
fun to share stories?
my heart is light, and I feel great. And you guys are wonderful.
Oh,
This is
Tina, thank you.
delightful.
Thank you so much. Glad you were here.
Thank you.
It's a perfect
Thank
Friday
you,
night.
Letitia, for telling me. This was wonderful. I feel like a 6-year-old, just
Oh,
fascinated by your
yeah. Well, we
just
have lots of events. Come and listen again sometime. And
Yes.
Letitia, you too. Thank you for coming.
Yes. It was wonderful to see all those new faces joining us tonight. Thank you so much for coming, and you're always invited to come back. Evening, this wonderful evening. Yes, I see some thumbs up. That's great to see. And my thumbs are definitely up.
The purple hat.
Oh, she got the purple hat.
Yeah, I got the purple hat out.
Looking good.
Looking a little empty at the moment.
Yes. And for those of you who aren't on camera, if you have something to say, go unmute yourself and go ahead, because I can't see you if you're trying to raise your hand or something. Okay.
Well, I haven't seen you for a little while, but it is great. It's just wonderful to get that magic of storytelling back again.
Oh,
Thank you
that's
so much
great.
for the presentations.
Yes.
Oh,
Thank you for joining us.
that's wonderful feedback. Thank you.
For those of, and I do want to give a special word of thanks now to Eva, who stepped in as an MC, to Anne for just tremendous stories. I love the way you become a child, and and I
Thank
tell
you.
you, you are so realistic. It's hard to realize you're not. And even when you're throwing a fit, it's great. And Ellen, I tell you, that bear and those 7 kittens, they're great.
Wonderful.
And then the Christmas Cuckoo, as she mentioned, is an old tale, and you may not realize it, but the Frances Brown who wrote that tale was blind. She was a very famous Irish poet and novelist, but she was blind from her childhood, and how she managed to do all that, I don't know. But
Yeah.
she's put together quite a collection of written material and was well known in her country. If you look her up on the in Google, you'll find that she's a pretty fascinating person. So do consider looking into a little bit into more about these things. I did also put in the chat the sources for the stories. So if you want to look, that information will be there if you saved your chat as well to help you find it. Philip, oops, you can't see that because I've got my thing turned on. Anyway, Neil Phillip has got quite a few great stories in it. It's Christmas fairy tales. If I turn off my background, I don't know if that'll help or not, but oh,
It's still fuzzy.
anyway, look forward to the library. Get into the libraries and get into that section called 398 in the children's section, and you'll find lots of great stories. And some of the ones that have been shared tonight, there's others there as well. Great place to look. A little bit of a nudge for our local libraries.
Yes, yes.
Well,
All right. Well, thank you all for coming this evening. And please, if you have a mind to go to our website at seattlestorytellers.org and make a donation to that beautiful purple hat. And
Oh,